Howdy everyone, back again with another video on the movement elements in the movement alchemy system that I've developed. Today's element is water. Funnily enough, we've got rain clouds above. It's been raining all week, so what better time to talk about water. So, first off, the metaphysics of water relates to, in terms of willpower, the will to flow, right? So the will to flow emotionally, to flow physically, to flow mentally, to flow spiritually, like water. As we go into the physics, that's the very basic rundown of the metaphysics, the will to be. The physics of water relates to the fascia in the body, right? As well as literally the water molecules in the body. And the components of water itself, in terms of ferromagnetism or electromagnetism and polarity, water is diamagnetic. Now what diamagnetic means is that it has the affinity to the north pole of a magnet, as opposed to paramagnetic, which is something that has the affinity to the south pole of a magnet. Okay, so water is diamagnetic, and so is human tissue. So hemoglobin molecule, that's diamagnetic. Oxygen, which you might remember in the previous videos, is paramagnetic. So when you breathe, that goes into the core, feeds the whole body, connects to each hemoglobin molecule and each water molecule, and helps to conduct electricity. Okay? Now water has an infinite capacity to carry energy and information. So when we get to the fascia in the body systems, the fascia encases muscles. So you got individual muscles, you got a bicep, you got a deltoid, you got your forearms, your brachialis, all that. The fascia encases all of those so that they can work in concert together when you do something like a push, right? Now the water, the fascia that is encasing that is made of up to 70% water. So that means 70% of that fascia is storing information. So each time you move, that water is storing information through electrical conductivity of the cells, etc. Being stored in the nervous system in particular patterns, okay? So the fascia can work in individual patterns or in integrated patterns. Now I'm going to get into the actual fascia themselves. So first off, you got the anterior oblique sling, which consists of the external oblique here, internal oblique here, and this adductor. Or I may have that backwards. This external oblique, this internal oblique, that adductor. Right? So when you throw a ball like that, this external oblique works with this internal oblique and the opposite adductor. So as you throw, this twists, this works together, and this stabilizes the hip. Bang. So that closes that fascia. You might remember that from the previous video I was talking about. When you have a walking pattern, come into a controlled fall like so, that's a controlled shortening of this fascia, a lengthening of the fascia at the back, which is the posterior oblique sling. Now, key important thing is to note that I like to combine these two slings as one pair of slings. So it's a pair of slings that runs across like so, and then back on the opposite side here. So the posterior oblique sling is this lat, this glute, and the intervening fascia in the core. So basically diagonally here, runs down like that. Then you've got one in the other direction. Okay? Now we've got the frontal sling. Now this is the sling that pretty much goes around the body like so, like this. Alright? So it goes up the body and then back down. So anytime you're doing any kind of single leg work, so if I step up this hill here, that's working this frontal sling. Right. Now, you've got the deep longitudinal sling. Now the deep longitudinal sling runs from the back of the occiput on the right side, all the way down, crosses over to the other side, it goes down the sacrum on the opposite side, all the way down to the opposite heel. Again, comes back around, wraps, goes down here, and like so, and then switches again, alternating down to this side, all the way to these front two toes. Now what that sling does is, in a propulsion phase of gait, that sling catches it, stores it in the fascia and the core, and then releases it to the anterior and posterior oblique sling in order to propel the rib cage like that. Okay? Now there is a fourth pair of slings, which is the spiral sling, which goes all the way around in both directions. That's the one I understand the least, so I'm actually not going to comment on that. But basically that, in order to use the spiral sling, it's an integration of every other sling. So if I was to try and, say for example, do a 180 spin with a twist, that requires spiral motion in every joint of my body, working in concert for the goal of twisting. If I had restriction in any one fascial slings, for example, say my hip is locked up this way, and I'm not able to open this hip up, when I go to turn, I won't be able to open up, so I will overcompensate in this shoulder and lock this hip up. Does that make sense? It's just started raining on me, so I'll probably have to cut this a bit short. Now, actual dynamic movement is never one fascial sling. So I'm going to give one quick example with the mace. All right. So in order to use one sling in isolation or in targeting, you have to control the other slings. All right. So in order to have a purely twisting movement, like so, like that's primarily twisting in the core. Right? So that's going to primarily work the oblique and anterior and posterior oblique slings. Right? So in order to have efficient movement in those slings, I have to control movement in the other slings. Right? So in order to have efficient frontal plane movement, you have to control transverse and sagittal. So if I don't have enough, say if I've got overpowered anterior oblique sling and an underdeveloped frontal plane sling, when I go to step, I may collapse forward like so, like that. Because my body is in a committed position of moving with the slings that are most programmed in. Another thing I wanted to comment on fascia is when we don't understand and integrate and use our body in a fascial way, in a way that everything is interconnected, we feel flat. And when we don't move with fluidity, which is the whole purpose, so you'll know if you're using the things right because it'll feel fluid and easeful and efficient.